I'm a huge superhero fan.
This is Web-Spinning Spider-Man with Flyaway Action.
And thus, I am a huge comic book movie fan. I'd argue that the film or films that really got me into comic book movies were the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies that started in 2002. This trilogy, as well as the Bryan Singer X-Men movies, can be credited with launching the genre known today as superhero movies, which have now been made much more famous by the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But Spider-Man. Holy shit. When Netflix mailed the DVD for Spider-Man 1, back when Netflix mailing movies was still a thing, I lost my shit. I remember jumping up and down on the couch and running around the room in a frenzy, waiting for my family to come into the TV room after dinner so that we could all sit down and watch it, with that Danny Elfman score booming across the room as the main menu screen played on loop. The first time I saw Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man swinging through the streets of New York, there were a number of emotions going through my head, including envy. I wanted to be Spider-Man. And I loved the idea of being a hero. But I think that feeling of envy was brought on by another feeling that recurs whenever I see other superhero movies. That goosebump feeling, I guess I'd call it. It's the feeling that I have when a moment makes me so full of giddy little fanboy excitement that I actually have the urge to cry out. I get caught on my own breath. And it's almost always accompanied by goosebumps. There are several moments from the trilogy that I'd love to cite as scenes that gave me the goosebump moment. The first is from the first Spider-Man movie, where Peter is first discovering his powers, and he climbs up a wall for the first time. Then there's Spider-Man 2, which many people believe was an improvement upon the first film, me being one of them. This movie includes a scene where Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus are fighting on a train, and the theatrics and intense pacing accompanied by the epic orchestral score always have me bouncing in my seat. These are all moments that get a nerd like me seriously riled up. So that feeling, that goosebump moment, is something that I crave in movies today, most particularly comic book movies. The Spider-Man trilogy of the early 2000s was a staple of my childhood. And as much as I love Tom Holland's rendition of Spider-Man today for its comic accuracy and the fact that Tom actually looks like a teenager, Tobey Maguire will always be my favorite Spider-Man. So where am I going with this? Well, I recently went back and rewatched Spider-Man 3, the last of the Sam Raimi trilogy. Notice how so far I haven't mentioned it in comparison with the first two movies. Well, that's because in keeping with common knowledge, it sucks. Okay, let me rephrase that. The movie itself doesn't necessarily suck, but it crumbles in comparison to its predecessors, and it was a massive disappointment. At the time, I couldn't really differentiate what made it so weak, and so I convinced myself, as a kid, that it was actually quite good. But going back and watching it again as a soon-to-be adult, I almost wanted to cry. Spider-Man 3 is a poor film overall, but there's something about it that separates it from most other poor films. You see, I believe that Spider-Man 3 is a great film deep down, and it's tarnished by some pretty massive and evident flaws. And a small preface I'd like to address regarding Spider-Man 3 is that it is disliked more and more over time. Because as more and more superhero films are being made and improved upon, the third Spider-Man film ages and represents an infancy stage of superhero films, thus looking worse and worse in comparison to newer movies which have also revolutionized the genre. To cite examples, Spider-Man 3 was made in 2007. It was followed by both Iron Man and The Dark Knight in the following year, and it doesn't look great in comparison. There are also superhero movies today that break from the superhero formula, like Logan, and even those that parody it, like Deadpool.
You gotta do superhero landing. Wait for it. Woo! Superhero landing. Yeah, that's really hard on your knees.
So yeah, Spider-Man 3 will only get worse in the eyes of moviegoers. It's not gonna age well. But there are a few glaring issues in Spider-Man 3 that make it a pretty weak film. The first aspect that everyone points to is... well, I think you know what I'm about to say. Peter Parker's goth rebel montage sequence in which he roams the city to jazz music, objectifies women, and pushes his hair down to signify that he's a bad boy now. Also, is he wearing eyeliner? This part of the movie is just so stupid. Right off the bat, I'd make a motion just to omit it from the movie entirely. And so, let's analyze this. It starts about an hour and a half into the film, 1 hour and 26 minutes to be exact, when Peter has just been dumped by the love of his life, Mary Jane Watson.
It's not working. You and me.
What?
Only to learn that Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend, is the other guy who Mary Jane has apparently fallen for.
I'm the other guy. What?
Harry and Peter get into a fight, which then initiates Peter's weird-ass emo journey around the city, during which he dances very strangely and snaps his fingers behind a bunch of girls' asses. Wait, time out. Like, seriously, who was behind this? Like, who thought of this? This entire stupid sequence ends an hour and 43 minutes into the movie. That means that Peter's entire goth phase lasts for 17 minutes of screen time. Like, did that scene really need to be kept in a 2.5 hour movie? Come on, guys. Let's get it together.
It's not working.
What?
That could have easily been chopped. Well, there are better ways of showing that Peter Parker is going through a darker time, especially if you're only going to do it for under 20 minutes. Plus, Tobey Maguire was not at all convincing as the badass he was supposed to become.
Your shots are so good.
I'd love to shoot you sometime.
Peter Parker. Peter.
And yes, even if you make the argument that the symbiote gives you the confidence to feel like you can do whatever you want, and so the creators of this movie were aware that Tobey Maguire looked super dumb, it really doesn't matter. If that was what they were going for, general audiences did not understand that, and the results showed. So yeah, if you want to show Peter struggling, make it real, not just the product of an alien possessing him along with a hastily added breakup.
What are you talking about?
Maybe continue to elaborate on his relationship with Mary Jane, and how being Spider-Man takes a toll on the amount of attention he can give to MJ, without making MJ look so whiny and annoying. Maybe make Spider-Man's identity revealed. Maybe kill off a character early on in the movie. Aunt May, or even Harry. Harry would be nice. That'd get rid of that stupid memory loss MacGuffin that was thrown in halfway through to clean up some messy plot points. Or you could go a different route, and have Spider-Man actually fail. Maybe he gets placed in a scenario like the train sequence in Spider-Man 2. Except this time, he can't save everyone. Maybe create a scenario in which people have lost their lives because of Spider-Man's inadequacy. And more importantly, because of Peter's failure. This guilt and this more emotional character arc could have driven the main story, and definitely take the place of another aspect of this movie that everyone hates, and that is Venom. Venom. What was this? Topher Grace doesn't necessarily do a bad job of playing Venom, but it's just a weak depiction of arguably Spider-Man's greatest foe. It's stupid, and it's thrown in last minute. Getting rid of the symbiote and Peter's weird goth sequence would eliminate Eddie Brock's arc and kill two birds with one stone. The writers could have also thrown in Eddie Brock as a much more minor character and established him as Peter's nemesis without rushing Venom's origin. They could have carried him over into the next movie and audiences would feel more connected to him. Eddie Brock is stupid in this movie. Stupid. And I know, I keep using the word stupid, but it's stupid. Eddie Brock is stupid and unnecessary. Making him less important gets rid of the too many villains complaint, which has beaten the shit out of this film. Which brings me to my next point. Sandman, in my opinion, was a strong enough villain to carry this movie as the only villain. Okay, so hear me out. With a few changes, he could be up there with the likes of Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. I'd argue that the most moving part of this movie, the only real goosebump scene for me, was the scene where Sandman is attempting to form for the first time, and he can't pick up his locket with his sick daughter's face on it. It gets me every time. Sandman's emotional side could have given us a way better villain, a villain that we as the audience feel for. A lot like Eric Killmonger in Black Panther earlier this year. Create a scenario in which Spider-Man gets in the way of Sandman trying to steal something for his daughter, like food or medicine or money, and because of it, Sandman goes to jail and his daughter dies because of it. That is a clear and reasonable motivation for a villain to go into a blind and angry tirade. In the movie, Sandman doesn't even really need to hate Spider-Man or even act like some angry generic bad guy. Make him sad. And make him take his anger out on the one person who got in the way of saving his daughter's life, other than the law. And get rid of him being the guy who killed Uncle Ben. It's just another unnecessary extra plot point. That's what I would love to see on the screen. The combination of two emotionally charged characters would have easily gotten us a Spider-Man 4. Okay, so a recap. The big problems that this movie had that I addressed were Peter's emo sequence, Mary Jane being annoying and whiny, a miscast Eddie Brock and a sloppy Venom, an underdeveloped Sandman, Harry's weird memory loss, and too many villains. Okay, so here's my script layout that could potentially eliminate all of these problems. We begin with Spider-Man being normal, saving people and shit. Immediately, Flint Marko's character is developed. We spend time seeing that he has a sick daughter, and he would do anything for her. He gets into the Sandman accident the same way he does in the movies. Again, Flint Marko is not Uncle Ben's killer in this story. As Sandman, Marko realizes that he can get away with stealing more shit for his daughter. However, while he's trying to rob something, Spider-Man gets in the way. He knocks Sandman out, and Marko, who doesn't know how to control his powers yet, gets arrested and goes back to jail. Meanwhile, Harry Osborn is plotting his revenge on Spider-Man and is training with the same equipment that his father used. Harry attacks Peter, and in the process, he gets into a sticky situation where Peter must save Harry's life. Say Harry's hanging from a cliff or something. Don't make Peter Parker throw a literal grenade at his best friend. Regardless of the symbiote idea, it's out of character. Have Peter try and save Harry, and have Harry die. Boom, gone, right early on in the film, just to end the first act. Meanwhile, in jail, Flint Marko's wife visits and tells him that they weren't able to save Flint's daughter, that her illness took her life. Another death. This creates a parallel scenario for both of our characters, villain and hero, Sandman and Spider-Man. Both of them have lost someone that they care about deeply, and it is because of their own inability to save them. However, the two characters both elicit different reactions to their failures. Sandman takes the information and decides to become evil. He escapes prison and starts wreaking havoc on the city. Peter, meanwhile, is torn apart because of his guilt. Mary Jane, instead of being super annoying like she is in this movie, comforts Peter and makes him realize that it wasn't his fault. Peter is haunted by the guilt of losing his best friend, and let's say maybe he's failing in school, he's neglecting Mary Jane, he loses his job working as a photographer for J.J. Jameson. Maybe Aunt May gives Peter some huge speech about Uncle Ben and how Peter has responsibility to take care of people like MJ. You know, with great power comes responsibility. You know how it goes. And Peter decides to go out and change for the better, to go fight Sandman. They have an epic showdown, which maybe turns into the two characters identifying with each other and forgiving each other. Sandman makes the same exit that he does in the actual movie, and Peter just moves on with his life. He fixes things with MJ and he gets his job back. He's Spider-Man again. Maybe have an Eddie Brock cameo at the end, teasing Venom for the next movie. Bada bing, bada boom. No stupid goth sequence, no injustice onto Venom, no memory loss, none of that bullshit. Spider-Man 3 wasn't intended to be a finale, so maybe this movie doesn't have to be an epic finale of the trilogy, with 3 villains and too many side stories. This movie could have represented a rebirth of Spider-Man for the 4th movie, which was obviously planned to be made until Spider-Man 3 was such a failure. What do you think? Any better than the actual Spider-Man 3? Please feel free to let me know in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. I'm still learning.